The politics of martyrdom, Iran's management of defeat. The state funeral in Tehran for the 60 victims of the war with Israel is not merely an act of mourning, it is a meticulously choreographed piece of political theater, a central element in the Iranian regime's strategy to manage a catastrophic defeat and transform it into a source of national strength and future justification for revenge. 1.1. The ritual of sacred defense, constructing the narrative. The imagery described, thousands in black, senior leadership in attendance, the location in Revolution and Azadi, Freedom Squares, is all part of a well-honed ritual. The plot: to frame the victims not as casualties of a failed defense but as holy martyrs who sacrificed for their country. This is a direct invocation of the sacred defense narrative from the Iran-Iraq War, the foundational myth of the Islamic Republic. The intention: channeling grief into resolve. The regime's primary intention is to take the nation's genuine grief and anger and channel it away from any potential criticism of the government's failure to protect its most valuable human assets. Instead of asking, "How did our security fail so catastrophically?" the public is encouraged to ask, "How can we avenge these noble martyrs?" Unifying the nation. A mass public funeral creates a powerful sense of collective identity and shared loss. It unites the populace against a common external enemy, Israel and the US, and reinforces the legitimacy of the regime as the defender of the nation, humanizing the loss, dehumanizing the enemy. By highlighting the presence of 4 women and 4 children among the dead, the state media is crafting a narrative of barbaric, indiscriminate Israeli aggression. This serves to galvanize international sympathy and paint Israel as the villain, while obscuring the fact that the primary targets were high-level military commanders and nuclear scientists. The larger, staggering figure of over 600 dead since June 13th reinforces this image of a nation under a brutal, sustained assault. 1.2. The language of defiance. The IRGC's war of words. The statements from Foreign Minister Araghchi will never accept the word surrender, and the IRGC are the verbal component of this strategy. They are a masterclass in psychological warfare designed to project strength from a position of weakness. The plot: to issue threats so grandiose and terrifying that they overshadow the reality of the recent military defeat and deter future attacks through sheer rhetorical force. The intention: deterrence by threat of annihilation, the warning of destructive blows and a retaliation that would be more severe and terrible than before, potentially including the collapse of Israel, is not a credible military plan, especially given their recent losses. It is a psychological deterrent. The intention is to create uncertainty and fear in the minds of Israeli and US war planners, to make them question whether a future strike is worth risking such an apocalyptic response. However unlikely. Managing domestic expectations. The IRGC's claim that the majority of Iranians are calling for severe retaliation serves 2 purposes. It justifies their own hardline stance, and it creates a public mandate for future aggressive actions. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The counterclaim of success, the claim of inflicting heavy damage on Israeli facilities and the largest US base, is a necessary piece of counter-propaganda. It is an attempt to create a narrative of a symmetrical conflict, of a heroic back and forth, rather than the one-sided decapitation strike that actually occurred. It is essential for maintaining the IRGC's prestige and credibility with its own fighters and regional proxies. Iran's strategy is a textbook case of managing defeat. Through the powerful rituals of martyrdom and the deployment of terrifying rhetoric, the regime is attempting to survive a devastating blow, rally its people, deter its enemies, and lay the psychological groundwork for a future war of revenge.
Part 2. The Gaza Quagmire, the War of Aid and Information. While the Iran-Israel front has shifted to psychological warfare, the Gaza front remains a brutal, kinetic, and informational battlefield. The intelligence reveals a descent into ever darker tactics, both on the ground and in the realm of propaganda. 2.1. The Drugged Flower Allegation, a new front in information warfare. The accusation by the Gaza government's media office that addictive drugs, oxycodone, are being mixed into humanitarian flour is a shocking and potent allegation. The plot: to completely discredit the entire Israeli and US-backed humanitarian aid effort in Gaza, reframing it from an act of relief into a malevolent plot of mass subjugation. The intention to destroy trust. The primary intention is to destroy any trust the Gazan population might have in non-UN or non-Hamas-controlled aid channels.
If the people believe the food is poisoned or drugged, they will reject it, thereby reinforcing their dependency on Hamas-controlled distribution networks. To pathologize the enemy. This is a powerful form of dehumanization. The accusation is so heinous that it paints the enemy, Israel and the US, as monstrous, willing to stoop to any level of depravity. It is designed to incite maximum outrage both within Gaza and internationally, to create a humanitarian catch-22. This puts Israel and the GHF in an impossible position. They cannot definitively prove a negative that no pills were ever planted by anyone. Any attempt to deny the charge will be seen as a cover-up. It creates a humanitarian catch-22 where any aid provided through these channels is now tainted by suspicion. This is a sophisticated and deeply cynical information warfare tactic. It targets the most basic human need, food, and turns it into a weapon of fear and mistrust. 2.2. The unceasing violence and the plight of children. The backdrop to this information war is the relentless physical violence. The report of 37 deaths, including at least 9 children, in a single day of airstrikes underscores the brutal reality. The strategic implication, the continued killing of civilians, especially children, provides the fertile ground in which allegations like the drugged flour can take root and seem credible. Each airstrike that hits a school or a home in a refugee camp erodes Israel's moral standing and lends credence to the narrative that it is a malevolent actor. The death of people awaiting food aid further reinforces the image of a broken and dangerous humanitarian system. Part 3. The Israeli fault lines, a government under siege. The intelligence reveals a government in Israel that is facing immense and growing pressure from multiple fronts, creating deep internal fault lines. 3.1. The public uprising, the hostage families versus Netanyahu. The massive protests in Tel Aviv, ongoing for over 20 months, have now reached a new level of intensity and focus. The plot. The protesters' plot is to generate so much domestic political pressure that it forces the Netanyahu government to prioritize a hostage deal over its military objective of destroying Hamas. The shift in blame. The crucial development is that the families of some hostages are now publicly blaming Prime Minister Netanyahu as the primary obstacle to a deal. This is a devastating political blow. It reframes the debate from Hamas won't agree to Netanyahu won't agree. The appeal to Trump. The call for US President Donald Trump to intervene is a sign of ultimate desperation and a complete loss of faith in their own government. They see Trump as a transactional leader who might be able to force Netanyahu's hand in a way that institutional diplomacy cannot. This is an extraordinary situation where Israeli citizens are appealing to a foreign leader to pressure their own prime minister. 3.2. The diplomatic impasse, the unbridgeable gap. The statement from the senior Israeli official that no further progress has been made and that both sides' stances have not changed is the stark reality that cuts through Trump's optimistic rhetoric. The irreconcilable positions. Israel's position. The war only ends when Hamas is destroyed. A ceasefire before that is a victory for Hamas. Hamas's position. The hostages will only be released as part of a deal that guarantees a permanent end to the war. The intention behind the leak. The Israeli officials' leak to Walla News is a deliberate act of strategic communication. The intention is to publicly counter Trump's claim of an imminent deal and to manage public expectations within Israel. It is a way of saying, don't get your hopes up, the fundamental impasse remains. 3.3. Netanyahu's high-stakes trip to Washington. Netanyahu's planned visit to Washington is a mission to navigate these treacherous cross-currents. The plot. to shore up US support, manage the public rift over the ceasefire, and push forward his own agenda of normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia, all without conceding on his core war aim of defeating Hamas. The intention to reassert control. The trip is an attempt to reassert his control over the narrative and the US-Israel relationship. To secure a win, normalization with Saudi Arabia would be a massive, historic achievement for Netanyahu, one that could potentially bolster his political standing at home and provide a victory to offset the quagmire in Gaza. To resist pressure, he will go to Washington to explain why Israel cannot accept the American vision for a ceasefire linked to a Palestinian state, attempting to convince the administration that the destruction of Hamas must come first. Part 4. The Third Front. The persistent Houthi threat. The Houthi attacks from Yemen serve as a constant reminder that the Gaza conflict is not isolated but is part of a wider, regional confrontation. The Houthi plot, to maintain military pressure on Israel, demonstrate their continued relevance and commitment to the axis of resistance led by Iran, and disrupt international shipping in the Red Sea. The intention, a war of attrition. Each missile launched, even if intercepted, forces Israel to expend costly air defense interceptors. It is a war of economic and military attrition on a third front. Maintaining solidarity. The attacks are a performance of solidarity with the Palestinians, bolstering the Houthis' credibility in the Arab and Muslim world. A message to Iran. It is also a signal to their patrons in Tehran that despite the recent devastating blows Iran has suffered, its proxies are still active, loyal, and capable of striking the enemy. The Israeli response. Israel's warning of a strong response and a potential sea and air blockade shows that it takes this threat seriously. However, a full-scale operation against Yemen would be a major undertaking that would stretch Israeli resources even further. For now, they are relying on air defense and deterrence, but the Houthi front remains a persistent and dangerous wild card. Grand synthesis. The unwinnable war of nerves. The intelligence, taken as a whole, paints a picture of a region locked in an unwinnable war of nerves, where military victories are fleeting and the primary battle is for psychological and narrative dominance. The weaponization of grief and victimhood. Both Iran and the actors in Gaza are masterfully weaponizing grief and victimhood. Iran turns its dead scientists into martyrs to fuel national resolve. The accusers in Gaza use shocking claims about aid to frame their people as the ultimate victims of a monstrous enemy. This is a powerful tactic in the age of global media. The crushing weight of internal politics. The Israeli government is being torn apart by the contradictory pressures of public opinion, hostage families, and its own hardline ideology. This internal division is a major strategic vulnerability that its enemies can see and that its allies are struggling to manage. The illusion of ceasefires. The repeated talk of ceasefires, whether from the US or other actors, is largely an illusion. The core objectives of the primary combatants, Israel, Hamas, Iran, are so fundamentally opposed that no sustainable negotiated peace is currently possible. The ceasefires are tactical pauses in a long-term existential struggle. The persistence of the axis of resistance. Despite the massive blow suffered by Iran, its proxy network, exemplified by the Houthis, remains active. This demonstrates the resilience of Iran's asymmetric strategy. Even if the head of the octopus is wounded, the tentacles continue to fight, ensuring that Israel remains bogged down in a multi-front conflict. The Middle East is caught in a tragic feedback loop. Israeli actions in Gaza fuel regional outrage, which empowers groups like the Houthis and reinforces Iran's narrative. Iran's actions and threats fuel Israeli resolve and its coercive policy. And the human cost, from the funeral processions in Tehran to the airstrike victims in Gaza to the anguished hostage families in Tel Aviv, continues to mount in a conflict where every side is convinced of its own righteousness and every path to true peace seems impossibly blocked.